Well, we have another question, and the question that asks here, if the assertion that lack of interest in education is not confined to analytic philosophy, but it is particularly marked in that tradition. If it is true, which of the following statements must be deemed false? Now, this question uh, is the line of the question, which is taken from the third paragraph of the first line, where it is stated lack of interest in education is not restricted to analytic philosophy, but it is particularly marked in that tradition, right? So, if you say that the question that is asking us to identify means which statement is false, right? The choice or the statement which have been given here out of the four, we need to find out one which is must be deemed false, isn't it? And means on the basis of the idea that many philosophers, right, especially those in analytic philosophy, they are not very much interested in education, right? M- Not much interested in education as a topic for what? As a topic for you can say that deep philosophical thought. In simpler term, if you say also the passage tells us that what analytic philosophy uh, or analytic philosophers, right, do not care much about education as a serious subject, though the lack of interest is found in other areas too, isn't it? So, out of the four statements provided, we need to pick one that doesn't match that idea or match this idea, and is therefore that will be called as a false, right? So let's check that. Okay. So the choices which have been given here, the first choice, which is stated, numerous philosophers, which means called as many philosophers, SQ, the philosophical scrutiny of education. Now, if you observe that the statement, the first statement, which is stated about numerous philosophers, SQ. What do you mean by SQ? SQ is indicating as a deliberately, deliberately avoid, deliberately avoid, or you can say stay away from something. For example, if you say someone eschews unhealthy foods, right, they make a conscious effort to avoid eating it. Isn't it similar to that when we say numerous philosophers eschew the philosophical scrutiny of education? This clearly indicating that many philosophers avoid the philosophical scrutiny of education, and that this particular line can be drawn from here, where it is stated in the third paragraph, penultimate line, where it is stated many luminaries in the history of philosophy have had things to say about education, right? So, who are they? You can say Plato, Aristotle, Locke, Rousseau, Kant, Mill, Whitehead, and Dewey, to name a few. And educational theme can be discerned in the writing of the latter so and so, though this usually goes unnoticed and unremarked, isn't it? This is again called as a one of the line where it is stated that how uh, many luminaries in the history of philosophy have had things to say about education is what. Now this usually goes unnoticed and unremarked, means that doesn't make any kind of importance, you can say. Even you also find out in the second paragraph of the passage, where it is stated most philosophers are happy to see philosophy of education as a backwater. When we say that backwater, it means called as a neglected and are not motivated to engage with it because they don't believe that education matters to philosophy. So, if we observe this particular line, right, so what we can draw here, we can find out the line verifies that many philosophers avoid engaging with education as a subject of philosophical inquiry. So hence option A cannot be considered as the deemed false. It will be considered as true. and verified. Now, coming to the second option. So, second option stated canonical text, even substantial engagement with educational theme, right? Canonical text evince a substantial engagement with educational themes. Now, that's what you can find out in here only, third paragraph, where it is stated lack of interest so and so is not confined to analytic philosophy, but it is particularly so and so. Then, after the author stated about I was an undergraduate, then I don't remember philosopher at either institution staging lectures or seminar on philosophy of education the entire time. It was only when I went to Russia or so and so, uh, I encountered thinkers who believed education to be such of critical importance in human life that no serious philosophers could fail to take an interest in it. No serious philosopher could fail to uh, take an interest in it. Of course, that is not a distinctively Russian or Soviet view. Many luminaries, after that, it is clearly stated, many luminaries in the history of philosophy have had things to say about education. Right? Who are those luminaries? You point out about Plato and examples of a few means luminaries, and their statement, educational themes, can be discerned in the writings of latter so and so, through though this usually goes unnoticed and unremarked. This makes a clear idea that the classical philosophers whose names have been given, right, they have engaged with the educational themes in their work, right. So in that case, this could be called as a taken from the last line or from the third paragraph of the passage where it is stated canonical text evince substantial engagement. So when you say substantial engagement, so this could be considered as the truth, right? Because unremarked and unnoticed points out that. So therefore, this cannot be called as a must be deemed false. So option B is also eliminated. C said teacher grapples to promulgate educational philosophy. Now, when we say that teacher grapples to promulgate educational philosophy, if you observe that the second paragraph, first line, the distinguished philosopher, Philip Kitcher is an exception, right? That proves this rule. So which rule? The rule which is pointed above. But it is noteworthy that in the beginning to his recent book, The Main Enterprise, right, of the World Rethinking Education in the year of 2022, he laments. What did he do? He laments that most philosophers think of the subdiscipline of philosophy of education as an academic slum occupied by intellectual mediocrities who produce dull and unsophisticated work, right? So, teacher himself, now he talks about others, teacher himself dissents from this view, right? So, but he is right that it is the prevailing opinion. Most philosophers are happy to see philosophy of education as a backwater. Now, it is his view, right? So, this shows that what? This shows nothing but Teacher is attempting to promote and defend the philosophy of education despite prevailing disinterest. Now, that's why we can say it is true, and in that case, this statement cannot be or must not be deemed false here. So option A and A, B, C, these three are clearly eliminated because they are true on the basis of the passage given, isn't it? Whereas option D, which is stated, um, pedagogues frequently disregard education as a philosophical discourse. Now, in that case, if we look at the last paragraph and the bracket line where it is stated what a misconceived attempt at the delegation, since many misconceived attempt at delegation, since many such schools have long schools have long since lost interest in matter philosophical, but that's another story. Now look at the term called as a but, right? The word but, which is clearly indicating nothing but a contrast, right? So if we see that what, even earlier to that also we can find out, um, but while this analytic philosophy of education inspired important work, its influence on the philosophical mainstream has been minimal. So that now the philosophy of education is often considered something no self-respecting philosopher need bother with, something that should be left to suitable persons in faculties of education and teacher training, right? So after that, it is stated a misconceived attempt at the delegation given to the teacher, since many such schools have long since lost interest in matters, right? Long since lost interest in matters philosophical, but that's another story. Now, in that case, this line doesn't point out that pedagogues frequently disregard education as a philosophical discourse, right? They lost interest in matters philosophical, but that's another story, cannot be drawn that what frequently, because this line suggests that institutes or faculties involved in education no longer may no longer, you can say that, no longer emphasize no longer emphasize philosophical issues, emphasize philosophical issues, but it does not directly claim that educators, you can say that educators or pedagogues, sorry, educators or pedagogues means frequently disregard education as a philosophical discourse or philosophical discussion, right? So therefore, D must be deemed false here, right? Because it proves that it is not correct as per the statement point out, right? Um, Hence, we consider option D would be the answer, isn't it? Hope you understood this. That's all. Thank you.